Hey, Conor here at Neversink Farm, and today I want to talk about some tips for watering during the critical stages of making starts and transplanting. So, start with making starts. Water is critical to getting seeds to germinate. This is true in the field, just like it's true with starts. Temperature is another thing that's important too, but we're just talking about water. So for having my trays of starts germinate, 100%, the best thing to do is a germ chamber, right? Because it's heated with steam, so everything stays moist. So that's really your best bet. Now, if you don't have a germ chamber, then what I recommend is one of these little faucet nozzles. I think that's what they're called too, a faucet nozzle. Yep. And this works really, really nicely. It just sends out a little mist, and then you can keep everything, the surface of the soil, nice and wet while your seeds are germinating. You don't want things waterlogged, and obviously there's a balance between being waterlogged and just being wet enough to germinate. But this is going to require, you going into your propagation house or to your windowsill or whatever, or anything in between, pretty regularly throughout a sunny day to make sure that things don't dry out. Because once they dry out, that's it. Your germination isn't going to be as good anymore. So the faucet nozzle works really, really well. And if you're somewhere where it's really, really hot and things are just drying out too quickly, you can cover with a little bit of Agribon or something, and that might help to make sure that things are going to stay moist. And what some people do is also make their own little germination chamber with their little heat mat, make a little covering with plastic, and keeping it moist inside of there. Though that can bring its own problems, and it's more of a temporary solution. So once you germinate, and then now you want to keep your prop house watered. Well, if you're hand watering and you're using one of these guys, right? This is a long job. This isn't something that you rush, because you've got to go back and forth over each tray. And we're talking like 8 times back and forth over each tray to make sure everything is well watered. And that takes time, and that might have to be done twice a day in the summer, right? Because you have to water through the tray. You can't just water the surface, right? And you're going to know if the tray feels light, then it wasn't well watered. And if you can see that the bottom is dry, you can see here that's dry, 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 right? That the water didn't get all the way through. Right? You want to make sure that when you're watering, and especially on something that has full of, has very large transplants, it's hard for the water to get through. Because, the roots are going to die if the water doesn't get all the way through, and you can start to see the water's coming through. And that's how you're going to know that it was completely watered. So you can go in there and check a few of the trays, to see if they have enough water in them. But hand watering it's tough. It's very time consuming. So I recommend at least having a backup sprinkler system and putting it on a timer. That's going to help. But what's going to happen is the things that are very big aren't going to get as much water. The things that have, are in bigger pots aren't going to get as much water. So you're going to have to go and maybe get the edges of where your sprinkler is getting and, re-get the big transplants, which are using more water and also a lot harder to water. But having that sprinkler behind you as your backup is just going to save tons of time so that you don't have to water each tray. Okay, so tips for watering in the field. When you're direct seeding, something like carrots, which is a really good example because it needs to remain moist for many days. The best thing to use is overhead. So something like a wobbler is really good. Make sure you're getting good coverage. It's all about pressure, right? And having enough water flow through it. And walking the field 2-3 times a day, seeing a section where you seeded, and if it's drying out, turn that sprinkler back on. There isn't a set amount of time. I can't tell you need to water for exactly 47 minutes every single day. That's just not possible, right? You have to use your senses, your fingers, your eyes, everything else to know. If it's raining, you don't have to water. If it's burning hot sun and the soil's drying out, you have to water. But you don't want to wait until those extremes come. That's why you want to constantly be walking your field and just turn on the sprinkler. And what I do is I have a little clip on the sprinkler so that I can clip it to my body, and then I won't forget to turn it off, because you don't want the sprinklers running for 24 hours and just waterlogging your soil or washing the seeds away. And that's really the key to good germination in the field, is about water, because there's not much you can do about temperature out there. So it's about maintaining a good moisture, and overhead and constantly observing and looking is going to make a difference. Now, for transplants, you always want to water your starts before leaving the house. And I have a sign right there at the door to make sure everybody waters the starts before doing it. And then when you're transplanting them, is to immediately turn on the sprinklers, get the surrounding soil wet, fill in it'll push the soil and fill in any gaps and air pockets. For me, it's anywhere from 15 minutes to a half an hour after we transplant for watering, but it's going to make a difference for your soil, for your environment, on how much. But you want to get the soil wet, and I usually just take my foot and scrape it against the soil. And if you scrape it and the first couple of millimeters come off that were wet and then it's bone dry underneath, you definitely did not water long enough, right? You don't even have to bend over. You just scrape a little bit of soil away and you'll know. But if you have clay soil or sandy soil, it's going to make a difference on how long. So it's about observation again. All right, so those are my general tips on the most important things to be concerned about watering at those critical stages of early growth and germination.